It's January, which means we have the results of the usage rates for December. Smogon's competitive Pokemon has a tiering system where Pokemon are organized into tiers based on how often they're used. That way you can use your favorites against Pokemon of a similar power level. Usage rates are used because generally speaking, people play to win, so the best Pokemon get used the most often. There's no need for a central authority to tell people what's good and what's bad, and people show it through their actions, and that's really the underlying principle of the whole thing. So let's take a look at the usage rates of December and talk about the most used Pokemon and the Pokemon that got dropped to the UU tier this month. At the top, we see Great Tusk and Gholdengo dominating the rankings. Both of them are independently good Pokemon. They have good moves, good stats, they have it all. But the reason they're the number one most used Pokemon is because of their influence on the hazard metagame. I've talked about this many times before, but Gholdengo can keep hazards up because its Ghost typing blocks Rapid Spin and its ability blocks Defog. There are plenty of Spike Pokemon too, like Garchomp, Glimmora, Tinglu, and Clodsire. Hazards are devastating for a team, and Gholdengo's Spike stack is one of the top playstyles in the tier. For that reason, Great Tusk is also important. Great Tusk is a Rapid Spin Pokemon that can threaten Gholdengo. Therefore, Great Tusk is the most reliable Rapid Spin Pokemon in the tier, and that role is valuable because of the meta being Spike Stack. It's speculative, but in January we might see these usage rates go down with the addition of Court Change Cinderace. Gholdengo cannot block Cinderace's Court Change, so Hazard Stack as a whole might become a less common playstyle. Similarly, Great Tusk might become less common because now certain structures might prefer Court Change Cinderace instead of Rapid Spin Great Tusk. Both of these Pokemon are still excellent, so I expect them to hover around the top 10 in usage, but we may see a new Pokemon at number 1. Chi-Yu will almost definitely get banned in January, but it's the best wall breaker in the tier. Almost nothing can take it on. Even though Chi-Yu is the strongest Pokemon in the tier, the reason it's not number 1 in usage is because not every team could fit a Chi-Yu style wall breaker. For example, defensive teams usually wouldn't have a need for a powerful wall breaker anyway. Next, we have Dragonite, who's very straightforward with its Dragon Dance movesets. It can Dragon Dance with the support of Multiscale and then become a nightmare to figure out because of Terrestrialization. The most common Terrestrialization for Dragonite is Terra Normal with Extreme Speed. Stab Extreme Speed is terrifying, and Normal has synergies with Dragon plus Flying. It's a tough prediction to try and use a fighting type move versus a Dragonite because you're expecting a Terrestrialization. It's also impossible to overestimate the impact of Multiscale. Multiscale means that Dragonite can set up on almost anything, and something as strong as Dragonite might only need one Dragon Dance to finish off an opponent. Next is Iron Valiant, who is one of the most versatile offensive Pokemon in the tier, and it can either go physical with Swords Dance, or special with Calm Mind, or special with Choice Specs. Booster Energy Iron Valiant is a powerful sweeper and outspeeds most Choice Scarf Pokemon. It's tough to react to because you can't know if it's special or physical, and it can Terrestrialize too. Beyond the top 5, you have the usual suspects. Tinglu is one of the top defensive Pokemon, Qianpao is one of the top offensive Pokemon. Dragapult is the fastest relevant Pokemon and has versatility similar to Iron Valiant. Annihilape's bulk up Rage Fist moveset is devastating, and King Gambit can sweep late game with Swords Dance and Supreme Overlord. What's interesting are the new Pokemon that have dropped from OU to UU, the lower tier. The most interesting one is Bexcalibur, who has dropped to UU. In truth, the early months of a new generation have their usage rates influenced by new toy syndrome, as it's called. Pokemon get used not necessarily because they're the best, but because they're new. Bexcalibur to an extent was one of those Pokemon. It got a lot of initial hype because it's a pseudo-legendary, but it's tough to justify fitting on a team. As a Dragon Dance Pokemon, you would often rather use Dragonite or Roaring Moon. Dragonite has a much easier time setting up with Multiscale, and Roaring Moon has more initial speed and access to Booster Energy. As an Ice type, you would often rather use Qianpao, who is stronger and faster. Choice Banded Bexcalibur is decent because of the power of Glaive Rush, but it is a little prediction reliant. It's not that Bexcalibur is bad, but it's tough to fit it on a team when you compare it to the other options. It happens that the roles it tries to fill are already saturated with the best Pokemon in the tier. Expect Bexcalibur to be a top Pokemon in the UU tier where it doesn't have that competition. Charizard dropped to UU, but that was expected. It's not a very good Pokemon in OU and was only OU because it was released as part of a 7-star Terra raid, and all Pokemon start in OU before getting dropped down. Ditto dropped to UU too, and basically Ditto is not a great Pokemon. Copying a Pokemon but with only 5 PP doesn't do much versus Pokemon that have recovery or are defensive. However, at the beginning of a generation, Ditto is a good Pokemon when there are powerful broken Pokemon running around. We saw this in Generation 8 too. Choice Scarf Ditto is one of the few ways to take on these overpowered broken Pokemon. But once these broken Pokemon get banned, Ditto isn't needed anymore and it fades into obscurity. Ditto always has 1 or 2 months of fame, and Ditto dropping to UU is part of its natural life cycle. Lowkicks and Maushold are 2 Pokemon who had their usage increased by New Toy Syndrome too. Lowkicks had Tinted Lens First Impression, which is honestly really fun to pull off, but it's just a poor Pokemon defensively and when it's not using First Impression. Lowkicks dropping a tier was eventually going to happen once the hype went away. Similarly, Maushold got a lot of hype because it's one of the strongest Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet with its Technician Population Bomb. However, it's not actually very good because Maushold dies if it ever attacks a Pokemon with Rocky Helmet, a common and good item. Beyond that, it also has issues with ghost types like Annihilate. Being one of the strongest Pokemon in the game kept the hype up for a while, but it eventually fell out of favor once people realized that it meant nothing if you can't beat Ghost type Pokemon, Steel type Pokemon, or Rocky Helmet. Orthoworm got usage because of Shed Tail, a new interesting move that is really good. The idea was you could use Stealth Rock and Shed Tail on one team slot. However, over time people realized that Cyclizar is a far better Shed Tail user because of Regenerator and its speed tier. Unlike Orthoworm, Cyclizar could reliably Shed Tail more than once in a game. It could also Shed Tail before getting attacked, unlike Orthoworm who could get dropped below 50% before it Shed Tails. On paper, the idea of using Stealth Rock and Shed Tail on one team slot was attractive, but in practice you got more value out of using a separate Stealth Rock Pokemon and Cyclizar. Finally, we have Tyranitar dropping. There are basically 2 reasons to use Tyranitar. One is independently because of its own merits, and the other reason is because you want to use a Sand team. Without Excadrill, Sand's best Sand Rush Pokemon is Lycanroc, who isn't very good. As a result, Sand is overall not a great playstyle right now, and that's one big reason why Tyranitar's usage is low. If you want to use Tyranitar on its own, one of its biggest strengths is that it can beat Chi-Yu, which is something very few Pokemon can claim. However, Tyranitar also struggles with Great Tusk, the most common Pokemon in the tier. In fact, it's so common you might even be better off using Special Tyranitar, because Great Tusk can stop most of whatever Tyranitar tries to do physically. Tyranitar isn't even a good Stealth Rock user because of Rapid Spin Great Tusk. Tyranitar initially saw enough usage to be OU with its Dragon Dance Terrestrialization moveset. Tyranitar could use Dragon Dance and then Terra Flying to escape the ground and fighting type weakness. Then it could use Terra Blast as a flying type to hit those fighting type Pokemon. This moveset could actually beat Great Tusk depending on Great Tusk moveset too. However, and this has been a problem since Generation 5, Dragon Dance Tyranitar is too slow to be an effective Dragon Dance Pokemon. After one Dragon Dance, plenty of Pokemon still outspeed it, including non-Choice Scarf Pokemon like Qianpao. Also, unaware Pokemon like Dondozo shut it down completely too. The idea of the mighty Tyranitar terrestrializing out of its fighting type weakness was interesting, but eventually the hype did die down. In other news, the RU tier has been formed, which is a tier below UU. Weavile, the top Pokemon from Generation 8, has now fallen to RU. Weavile losing Knockoff in Generation 9 was apparently a really big deal. Other notable Pokemon in the RU tier include Blissey and Slowbro, both OU Pokemon in Generation 8. Defensive Pokemon as a whole got nerfed in Generation 8 because Recover PP got cut in half. Blissey struggles because it doesn't have Toxic anymore and Seismic Toss is its strongest move. Pokemon like Garganacl shut Blissey down too. Blissey is too much of a liability now with all the different offensive Pokemon. Slowbro and Slowking both lost Teleport in Gen 9. Teleport was one of the biggest reasons for Slowbro and Slowking being good. They could tank a hit and then teleport out to an offensive Pokemon. They could do this multiple times throughout a game because of Regenerator, and it was a way to shield your frailer offensive Pokemon from taking damage. In Gen 9, Slowking got access to Chilly Reception, which functions as a sort of pivot move. The main intention of Chilly Reception is not to set up Snow, it's because it acts like Teleport. Because Snow doesn't cause damage anymore, it doesn't really matter if the weather is up. Obviously, you benefit more if you have an Ice type on your team, but you wouldn't go out of your way to fit it on your team. Chilly Reception is basically a pretty good pivot move on Slowking. Unfortunately though, Slowbro, unlike Slowking, does not have chilly reception, and without a slow pivot move, it's fallen into the depths of RU. In the coming months, we will have the NU tier, which is based off the usage of RU, and then the PU tier, which is based off the usage of NU. This will take a while though, and for now we have OU, UU, and RU. Out of these three, which tier are you having the most fun with right now? Let me know down in the comments below.